The committee room fell silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood up, her voice cutting through the political theater like a knife. What happened next would leave committee veteran Jim Jordan completely speechless and expose his legal ignorance before millions of Americans watching live. "Mr. Jordan," Crockett began, her Texas drawl steady and confident. "Since you keep talking about constitutional law, let me ask you one simple question that any first-year law student should know." Jordan leaned back in his chair, his usual aggressive smirk plastered across his face. He had no idea what was coming. The cameras captured every second as Crockett prepared to deliver a legal education that would demolish Jordan's credibility and go viral within minutes. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these epic political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. The tension in the room was electric. Jordan, known for his combative style and loud interruptions, thought he was dealing with just another freshman congresswoman. He was about to learn the hard way that Jasmine Crockett came armed with something he clearly lacked: actual legal knowledge. To understand why this moment was so devastating, you need to know who these two players really are. The contrast couldn't be more striking. Jasmine Crockett represents everything Jordan fears about the new generation of politicians. At 42, she's a former public defender and civil rights attorney who actually practiced law before entering politics. She graduated from law school, passed the bar exam, and spent years in courtrooms defending real people. Her legal credentials are solid, her knowledge is deep, and her courtroom experience taught her how to demolish opponents with facts. Crockett grew up in St. Louis, worked her way through school, and built her career fighting for justice. She knows the Constitution not because she read talking points, but because she used it every day to defend her clients. When she speaks about legal issues, she's drawing from years of actual practice, not political rhetoric. Jim Jordan, on the other hand, represents the old guard of political theater over substance. While he loves to play the role of a constitutional expert on television, his actual legal background tells a different story. Jordan has a master's degree in education and worked as a wrestling coach before entering politics. He never attended law school, never passed a bar exam, and never practiced law. Yet Jordan has built his entire political brand around aggressive questioning and claims of constitutional expertise. He interrupts witnesses, pounds tables, and shouts about the Constitution without actually understanding the legal principles he claims to defend. His style is all about performance, not substance. The stakes couldn't be higher. This committee hearing was being broadcast live, with millions watching. Jordan had spent months positioning himself as the constitutional authority on the committee, using his loud voice and aggressive tactics to intimidate witnesses and score political points. But now he faced someone who actually knew the law, someone who couldn't be intimidated by his usual tricks. Crockett had come prepared to expose the difference between someone who talks about the law and someone who actually knows it. The committee room was packed with reporters, staff members, and other representatives, all sensing that something big was about to happen. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation as clips from earlier in the hearing showed Jordan's typical grandstanding performance. What nobody expected was that his entire facade was about to crumble under the weight of basic legal questions from someone who actually went to law school. The hearing had been going on for 2 hours when Jordan launched into one of his signature rants. He pounded the table and raised his voice, claiming that the Democratic majority was violating constitutional principles and ignoring fundamental legal precedents. "This is exactly the kind of constitutional crisis our founders warned us about," Jordan declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We're seeing a complete disregard for the rule of law and the principles that make this country great." Other committee members had learned to just let Jordan rant and move on. His interruptions and grandstanding had become so routine that most witnesses and representatives just waited for him to finish his performance before continuing with actual business. But Crockett wasn't having it. She had been watching Jordan's act for months, listening to him make legal claims that any competent attorney would recognize as complete nonsense. as a former public defender who had actually used constitutional law to defend clients. She was tired of watching Jordan cosplay as a legal expert. "Point of order," Crockett interrupted, her clear voice cutting through Jordan's rambling. The room immediately quieted. Interrupting Jordan during one of his rants was unusual. Most members just let him exhaust himself. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the gentleman from Ohio a few clarifying questions about the constitutional principles he just referenced." Jordan looked annoyed at being interrupted. "I don't yield my time," he snapped, falling back on parliamentary procedure to avoid engagement. "I'm not asking you to yield," Crockett replied smoothly. "I'm simply noting that since you've made several specific legal claims, it would be helpful for the committee to understand the basis for those claims." The committee chairman, sensing the tension, allowed Crockett to proceed. Jordan shifted, uncomfortably in his seat, clearly preferring to give speeches rather than answer questions. "Mr. Jordan," Crockett began, "you mentioned constitutional precedent. Which specific Supreme Court cases are you referencing?" It was a simple question, the kind any lawyer would expect when making constitutional arguments. But Jordan's face showed the first signs of concern. He wasn't used to being asked to back up his claims with actual legal citations. "Well, there are numerous cases," Jordan replied vaguely. "The founders were very clear about these principles." "I'm not asking about the founders," Crockett pressed. "I'm asking about specific Supreme Court precedent. Since you're making constitutional arguments, surely you can cite the relevant case law." The room was now completely focused on this exchange. Reporters were leaning forward, sensing that something significant was happening. Other committee members stopped their side conversations to watch. Jordan tried to deflect. "Look, I think everyone here understands the basic constitutional principles involved." "Actually, I don't think everyone does understand," Crockett replied, her voice remaining calm and professional. "That's why I'm asking for the specific legal authority for your claims. It's a simple request." The tension was building. Jordan's usual strategy of loud interruptions and changing the subject wasn't working. Crockett was methodically backing him into a corner, and he was starting to realize it. "The Constitution is very clear," Jordan said, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Which part of the Constitution?" Crockett asked immediately. "Article? Section? Amendment? Since you're claiming it's clear, surely you can point to the specific text." Jordan's discomfort was now visible to everyone in the room. His confident demeanor was cracking as he realized he was being held to the same standard he applied to witnesses, except he couldn't answer the questions. "I think my position is well established," he replied weakly, a far cry from his usual booming voice. "Your position may be established," Crockett said, "but the legal basis for that position is what I'm asking about. And so far, you haven't provided any." The room was completely silent now, except for the clicking of camera shutters and the quiet hum of recording equipment. Everyone could sense that Jordan was in trouble, but nobody expected what came next. Crockett looked directly at Jordan, her expression serious but calm. This was the moment she had been building toward, and she was about to deliver a legal education that would expose Jordan's ignorance before the entire nation. "Mr. Jordan, let me ask you something that any first-year law student should be able to answer. Can you explain the difference between strict scrutiny and intermediate scrutiny in constitutional analysis?" The question hung in the air like a bombshell. For anyone with legal training, this was basic constitutional law, the kind of fundamental concept covered in the first semester of law school. But for Jordan, who had never attended law school, it might as well have been asked in a foreign language. Jordan's face went blank. He opened his mouth and closed it. The confident politician who had been lecturing everyone about constitutional law suddenly looked like a student who hadn't studied for the exam. "I think that's getting into legal technicalities," Jordan finally managed, his voice much quieter than usual. "Legal technicalities?" Crockett's eyebrows raised slightly. "Mr. Jordan, this is fundamental constitutional law. If you're going to make constitutional arguments in this committee, Don't you think you should understand basic constitutional analysis? The devastating nature of the moment was clear to everyone watching. Jordan, who built his reputation on constitutional expertise, couldn't answer a basic law school question. But Crockett wasn't finished. "Let me try something even simpler," she continued, her voice remaining professional, but carrying a slight edge. "Can you tell me what the rational basis test is? Another fundamental concept, even more basic than the first question." Jordan stared at her, clearly having no idea what she was talking about. "Again, I think these are legal technicalities that don't really apply to our discussion," Jordan said, trying desperately to deflect. "They don't apply?" Crockett's voice rose slightly, showing controlled incredulity. "Mr. Jordan, these are the basic tools of constitutional analysis. Every constitutional argument you've made today should be evaluated using these standards. How can you make constitutional claims without understanding how courts actually analyze constitutional issues?" The committee room was dead silent. Other representatives were staring at Jordan with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. The man who had spent years loudly proclaiming constitutional expertise couldn't answer questions that any competent lawyer would consider elementary. But Crockett still wasn't done. She was methodically destroying Jordan's credibility, and she had saved her best shots for last. "Okay, let me try one more time with something really basic," she said, her tone now carrying just a hint of the condescension that Jordan had shown to countless witnesses. "Mr. Jordan, can you tell me the 4 factors courts use in determining whether speech constitutes incitement under the Brandenburg test?" This was another fundamental First Amendment concept, the kind of thing any lawyer working on constitutional issues would know cold. Jordan just stared at her, his usual aggressive confidence completely evaporated. "I'm not sure that's relevant to our discussion today," he said weakly. "Not relevant." Crockett's voice was now filled with controlled outrage. "Mr. Jordan, you've spent the last hour making claims about First Amendment violations and constitutional overreach. The Brandenburg test is literally the standard courts use to analyze government restrictions on speech. How is that not relevant?" The room erupted in murmurs as the full impact of what was happening sank in. Jordan, the supposed constitutional expert, had been exposed as someone who didn't understand basic legal concepts that any constitutional lawyer would know. "Furthermore," Crockett continued, now fully in lawyer mode, "you keep talking about constitutional precedent, but you can't cite a single case. You claim to understand constitutional analysis, but you don't know the basic tests courts use. You lecture witnesses about the rule of law, but you apparently don't understand how legal analysis actually works." Jordan tried to interrupt, but Crockett wasn't finished. "Mr. Jordan, I have a simple question for you, and I think the American people deserve an answer. If you don't understand basic constitutional law, if you can't answer questions that any first-year law student could handle, what exactly qualifies you to sit on this committee and lecture others about constitutional issues?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Jordan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room as if searching for help, but found only cameras and stunned faces. I think my record speaks for itself," he finally managed. "Your record?" Crockett shot back immediately. "Mr. Jordan, your record is exactly what I'm questioning. You've built a career on claiming constitutional expertise while apparently never bothering to learn actual constitutional law. That's not a record to be proud of. That's a record that should embarrass you." The silence that followed was deafening. Jordan, the man who never met a microphone he couldn't dominate, sat speechless as Crockett delivered the final blow. The American people deserve better than political theater masquerading as legal expertise. They deserve representatives who actually understand the Constitution they've sworn to defend. And if you can't even answer basic questions about constitutional law, then perhaps you should stop pretending to be an expert and start listening to people who actually are. Jordan's face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger wasn't clear. But what was clear to everyone watching was that his credibility as a constitutional authority had been utterly destroyed in the span of just a few minutes. The cameras captured every second of his humiliation, and social media was already exploding with clips of the exchange. Jordan, who had built his brand on aggressive questioning and constitutional grandstanding, had been exposed as a fraud by someone who actually knew what she was talking about. The immediate aftermath of Crockett's demolition of Jordan was swift and brutal. Within minutes of the exchange, clips were circulating on social media with hashtags like Joe Jordan exposed and Crockett destroys, Jordan trending nationwide. The most devastating clip, Jordan's blank stare when asked about strict scrutiny, went viral almost immediately. Twitter users were sharing it with captions like, "When you claim to be a constitutional expert but don't know first-year law school concepts," and "This is what happens when political theater meets actual legal knowledge." Legal experts in law, professors quickly joined the conversation, many expressing shock that someone serving on a major congressional committee could be so ignorant of basic constitutional principles. A prominent constitutional law professor tweeted, "I show this clip to my students as an example of why we actually study law instead of just talking about it." The political implications were immediate and far-reaching. Jordan's reputation as a constitutional authority, carefully built over years of aggressive questioning and loud proclamations, had been shattered in just a few minutes by someone who actually understood the law. Conservative legal scholars distanced themselves from Jordan's performance. One prominent conservative lawyer wrote in a widely shared article, Conservatism requires actual knowledge of constitutional law. Performance art is not a substitute for legal education." Meanwhile, Crockett became an overnight sensation among legal professionals and progressive activists. Lawyers across the country were sharing the clips with admiration for her surgical precision in exposing Jordan's ignorance. Law school professors were already incorporating the exchange into their classes as an example of effective legal advocacy. The broader Democratic Party quickly rallied around Crockett's performance. Democratic leaders praised her for bringing actual expertise to the political debate and showing the difference between knowledge and grandstanding. What we saw today was the difference between someone who actually practices law and someone who just plays one on TV, said one senior Democratic representative. Congresswoman Crockett showed the American people what real constitutional expertise looks like. But the impact went beyond just politics. Legal education programs saw a spike in interest, with several law schools reporting increased inquiries about their constitutional law courses. The exchange had highlighted the importance of actual legal knowledge in political discourse. Jordan's attempts at damage control only made things worse. In a hastily arranged interview, he claimed that Crockett's questions were gotcha attempts, designed to embarrass him rather than advance the committee's work. "I'm not here to take law school exams," Jordan said defensively. "I'm here to fight for the American people and defend their constitutional rights." But this response only reinforced the impression that he was out of his depth. Legal commentators pointed out that understanding constitutional law isn't a gotcha. It's a basic requirement for anyone claiming constitutional expertise. The contrast with Crockett's post-hearing interviews was stark. When asked about her background, she calmly explained her legal education and experience, making it clear why she understood concepts that Jordan didn't. "I spent years as a public defender using these constitutional principles to defend my clients," Crockett explained. "When you actually practice constitutional law, you learn these concepts because people's lives depend on getting them right. It's not theoretical. It's practical knowledge that matters." The exchange also sparked broader conversations about qualifications and expertise in political discourse. Opinion writers across the political spectrum used the incident to discuss the difference between political performance and actual knowledge. Some conservative commentators acknowledged that Jordan's performance was embarrassing, while arguing that legal technicalities weren't the most important qualifications for political leadership. But even these defenses seemed weak in the face of such a clear demonstration of ignorance on topics Jordan claimed to understand. The incident became a case study in political communications programs, with professors using it to teach students about the importance of actual expertise versus manufactured authority. The exchange showed how quickly a carefully constructed political image could crumble when confronted with real knowledge. For Crockett, the moment established her as a rising star in democratic politics and a formidable voice on legal issues. Her calm, professional dismantling of Jordan's credibility showed a level of political skill that impressed observers across the political spectrum. Several major news outlets ran profiles of Crockett, highlighting her legal background and suggesting that she represented a new generation of politicians who brought actual expertise to their roles rather than just political ambition. The long-term implications for Jordan were more serious.
His authority on constitutional issues, central to his political brand, had been publicly destroyed. Committee colleagues began treating his legal pronouncements with visible skepticism, and his interruptions during hearings became less frequent and less confident.
The psychological impact on Jordan was evident in subsequent committee appearances. The man who had once dominated hearings with loud interruptions and aggressive questioning now seemed hesitant and uncertain when constitutional issues arose. His staff reportedly began screening his statements more carefully to avoid further embarrassment. Other Republican committee members distanced themselves from Jordan's constitutional arguments, with some privately expressing frustration that his ignorance had become a liability for the entire party. One senior Republican was overheard telling colleagues, "We need people who actually understand the law if we're going to make constitutional arguments." The incident also affected Jordan's relationship with conservative legal organizations that had previously supported him. Several prominent conservative lawyers publicly criticized his performance, arguing that it undermined serious constitutional arguments by associating them with obvious ignorance. Jordan's fundraising also took a hit as donors became concerned about his ability to effectively advocate for conservative legal principles. Major donors to conservative causes reportedly redirected their contributions to other representatives who demonstrated actual legal expertise. His media appearances became less frequent and more carefully managed. Producers began avoiding booking Jordan for discussions of constitutional issues, instead focusing on topics where his lack of legal knowledge wouldn't be as obvious. This significantly reduced his media profile and political influence. The incident also affected Jordan's standing with his own constituents. Town halls in his district featured questions about his legal qualifications, with some voters expressing disappointment that their representative had been so thoroughly embarrassed on national television. Jordan's attempts to rebuild his credibility included enrolling in constitutional law courses and hiring legal advisors to help him understand basic concepts. However, these efforts only reinforced the perception that he had been unprepared for his role on the committee. Media coverage of Jordan's future appearances invariably included references to his humiliation by Crockett, undermining his credibility even when discussing topics outside constitutional law. The incident had fundamentally damaged his political brand in ways that would be difficult to repair. The contrast with his previous confident demeanor was striking. Where Jordan had once interrupted witnesses and dominated hearings, he now sat quietly during legal discussions, clearly aware that any constitutional claims he made would be scrutinized for accuracy. His staff turnover increased significantly, with several senior advisors leaving to work for other representatives. Sources close to Jordan's office reported low morale and concerns about the congressman's political future. The incident became a defining moment of Jordan's career, overshadowing his previous achievements and fundamentally altering how colleagues and constituents viewed his capabilities. Political observers noted that recovering from such a complete public humiliation would require years of rebuilding credibility. More broadly, the exchange highlighted the growing sophistication of Democratic politicians and their willingness to directly challenge Republican grandstanding with facts and expertise. It signaled a shift away from simply enduring political theater toward actively exposing its emptiness. The incident also raised questions about the qualifications and expertise of other political figures who built their brands on claimed constitutional knowledge without actual legal education. Several other politicians found themselves facing similar scrutiny about their understanding of basic legal concepts. For the American public, the exchange provided a clear example of the difference between political performance and actual knowledge. It showed viewers that they could demand more from their representatives than just loud voices and confident assertions. The viral nature of the clips ensured that millions of Americans saw the exchange, many of whom had never seen such a clear demonstration of how political authority could be constructed without actual expertise. It was an educational moment disguised as political theater. As the dust settled, it became clear that Crockett's destruction of Jordan represented more than just a single embarrassing moment. It was a demonstration of how actual knowledge and expertise could cut through political noise and hold public figures accountable for their claims. The ripple effects continued for months after the initial exchange. Political science professors began studying the incident as an example of how expertise could shift power dynamics in political discourse. The exchange became required viewing in several university courses on political communication and democratic governance. Think tanks across the political spectrum published analyses of the incident, with most concluding that it represented a potential shift toward more substantive political discourse. Conservative think tanks were particularly critical of Jordan's performance, arguing that it undermined serious constitutional arguments and damaged conservative credibility. The incident also influenced political recruitment strategies. Democratic Party leaders began actively seeking candidates with professional expertise, rather than just political experience. Several prominent lawyers, doctors, and teachers announced congressional campaigns in the months following the exchange, explicitly citing Crockett's performance as inspiration. Republican strategists struggled to respond to this trend. Focus groups showed that voters were increasingly skeptical of candidates who claimed expertise without credentials. This forced the party to reconsider its approach to candidate selection and messaging. The exchange also affected how congressional hearings were conducted. Committee chairs began requiring members to provide evidence for factual claims, and lawyers started fact-checking statements in real time. The days of unchallenged political rhetoric were ending. Television producers noted changes in viewer behavior as well. Audiences were increasingly drawn to political content that featured genuine expertise and substantive debate rather than just partisan theater. This began influencing how political programming was formatted and promoted. The message was clear. In an era of political performance and manufactured expertise, those with real knowledge and skills would increasingly be willing to expose the key frauds and demand higher standards from public discourse. International observers viewed the exchange as a positive development in American democracy. Foreign diplomats and journalists commented that the incident showed American politics still had the capacity for self-correction when actual expertise challenged false claims. European legal scholars, in particular, praised Crockett's methodical approach to exposing ignorance. Several international law journals published articles analyzing the exchange as an example of how professional expertise could effectively challenge political posturing. The incident also influenced international coverage of American politics. Foreign news organizations began including more background information about the qualifications of American politicians when covering their statements, using the Jordan-Crockett exchange as justification for this additional scrutiny. For anyone following American politics, this moment became a benchmark for how expertise should triumph over performance and how real knowledge could still matter in an age of political theater. It reminded viewers that substance still mattered and that those who actually knew what they were talking about could still win the day. The cultural impact extended far beyond politics into popular culture. Comedy shows featured extended segments about the exchange, with comedians using it to highlight the absurdity of political expertise claims. Late-night television hosts spent entire monologues breaking down the legal concepts that Jordan couldn't understand. Social media memes proliferated for weeks, with users creating educational content that explained the constitutional law concepts Crockett had referenced. This created an unexpected wave of civic education, as millions of Americans learned about strict scrutiny and the Brandenburg test through viral social media content. The exchange influenced academic discourse as well. Political science journals published special issues analyzing the incident's implications for democratic governance and political accountability. Constitutional law reviews featured articles examining how the exchange demonstrated the importance of legal literacy and political leadership. Publishing houses reported increased sales of constitutional law textbooks and popular books about the Constitution. Bookstores created special displays featuring constitutional law primers, many of which explicitly reference the Jordan Crockett Exchange in their marketing materials. Online education platforms experienced massive enrollment spikes in constitutional law courses. One prominent legal education website reported a 400% increase in course registrations in the month following the exchange, with many students specifically citing their desire to understand the concepts that had exposed Jordan's ignorance. The incident also sparked discussions about political accountability in democratic societies. International democracy organizations used the exchange as an example of how democratic institutions could self-correct when expertise challenged ignorance. Regional and local political debates began incorporating similar challenges to claimed expertise. City council meetings, state legislative hearings, and local political forums saw citizens and officials demanding evidence for factual claims and challenging unsubstantiated assertions about legal and policy matters. The exchange became a touchstone for political authenticity. Campaign advertisements began featuring candidates' actual professional credentials more prominently, and voters started asking tougher questions about candidates' qualifications in their claimed areas of expertise. Political consulting firms began offering specialized training programs to help politicians avoid similar embarrassments. These programs focused on ensuring that political figures actually understood the subjects they claimed to know, rather than just providing them with talking points. The incident also influenced how political interviews were conducted. Journalists began asking more probing questions about politicians' actual knowledge rather than just their positions, and fact-checking became more prominent in real-time political coverage. What other political figures do you think need this kind of reality check? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss when we cover the next politician who gets exposed for not knowing what they're talking about. Trust me, after seeing how devastating this was for Jordan, there are going to be a lot more politicians hoping they never have to face someone like Jasmine Crockett in a hearing room. The legacy of this single exchange continues to influence American political discourse, serving as a powerful reminder that in a democracy, expertise and knowledge should matter more than performance and bluster. It stands as proof that when real professionals enter politics, they can hold the frauds accountable and elevate the quality of public debate for everyone. The incident also sparked nationwide discussions about the importance of professional qualifications in political leadership. Civic organizations began hosting forums about the role of expertise in democratic governance, using the Jordan Crockett Exchange as a case study in why credentials and knowledge matter in public service. Law enforcement. Organizations noted an interesting side effect: increased public interest in understanding constitutional rights. Police academies reported more detailed questions from citizens about Fourth Amendment protections and due process rights, suggesting that the viral nature of the exchange had educated the public about their legal rights. Professional associations across various fields took note of the incident's impact. Medical associations, engineering societies, and other expert organizations began discussing how to better engage in public policy debates and challenge misinformation in their respective fields. The exchange demonstrated how professional expertise could effectively counter political posturing. International democratic institutions also studied the incident as an example of how democratic systems could self-correct. The exchange was featured in democracy promotion programs as evidence that expertise and accountability could still triumph over political theater in established democracies. The ripple effects reached into corporate boardrooms as well. Business. Leaders began emphasizing the importance of actual expertise in leadership positions, with some explicitly citing the Jordan Crockett Exchange as an example of why credentials and knowledge matter more than charisma and confidence. Educational. Institutions at all levels incorporated the incident into their curricula. Elementary schools used age-appropriate versions to teach about the importance of studying and preparation. High schools featured the exchange in government classes to demonstrate how democratic accountability works. Universities analyzed it in political science, communications, and law courses. The exchange also influenced how political debates were structured and moderated. Debate organizers began including more fact-checking elements and requiring candidates to provide evidence for their claims. The Jordan Crockett model of methodical questioning became a template for holding politicians accountable. Social media platforms experienced lasting changes in political discourse patterns. Users became more likely to demand evidence for political claims and to challenge assertions with requests for specific sources and citations. The culture of accountability that the exchange represented spread throughout online political discussions. The incident demonstrated that in an era of misinformation and political theater, moments of genuine expertise and accountability could still capture public attention and drive meaningful change. It proved that substance could triumph over style when presented effectively, and that the American public was hungry for authentic political discourse. Women's professional organizations particularly celebrated the exchange as an example of how female expertise could challenge male political dominance. Legal associations noted that Crockett's success demonstrated the value of diversity in political leadership, showing how professional women could bring different skills and perspectives to political discourse. The incident also highlighted generational differences in political approach. Crockett, as a younger politician with recent professional experience, represented a new model of political leadership based on actual expertise rather than just political ambition or party loyalty. This contrast with Jordan's old-school political theater approach resonated with younger voters who valued authenticity and competence. Technology companies reported increased engagement with constitutional law content following the exchange. Educational apps focused on civics and constitutional law saw massive downloads, while online legal databases experienced significant traffic spikes as users researched the concepts Crockett had referenced. The exchange influenced judicial nomination processes as well. Senate confirmation hearings began featuring more rigorous questioning about legal knowledge, with senators using Crockett's methodical approach as a model for evaluating judicial nominees' actual understanding of constitutional law. International legal education programs began featuring the exchange as an example of effective legal advocacy and public accountability. Law schools in other countries used the incident to teach students about the importance of precision and preparation in legal argumentation. The story also sparked discussions about gender dynamics in political discourse. Many observers noted that a male politician might not have been able to challenge Jordan as effectively without being dismissed as overly aggressive. Crockett's calm, professional approach demonstrated how female politicians could leverage their expertise without triggering negative stereotypes. Corporate training programs began incorporating lessons from the exchange into their leadership development curricula. The incident became a case study in how preparation and genuine expertise could overcome bluster and intimidation tactics in professional settings. The lasting impact on congressional procedure was significant. Committee chairs began requiring